These are my predictions for the 2019 Bright Orange Football Volunteers. Starting with the first game, Georgia State, win. Why do I have that squared as a win? This is like Akron versus Ohio State. It's a great mismatch or a huge mismatch. And because it's a huge mismatch, Volunteers are going to look great against Georgia State. They're going to make a high amount of big plays in the first half. They're going to make a high amount of big plays in the second half. They're going to score more than 24 points in the first half and in the second half. And they're going to win by 28 points or more. And also, they're going to win by more than 28 points. And also, the Volunteers are going to pass for more than 150 yards, and the Volunteers are also going to run for more than 120 yards. A no all too easy win for the Volunteers. Second game, BYU, win. Why am I saying this is a win? This is going to seem similar to that 2016 Virginia Tech, the Virginia Tech game, because BYU, if they're not a great team, they're usually a good team in college football, and they have the roster to challenge the Volunteers and make it a decent, close game, I expect BYU, they're able to keep this a close game for both the first half and the second half because they have the roster to challenge the Volunteers to keep it a close game, except Volunteers are able to make the big plays in a close game more than BYU in both the first half and in the second half, along with thundering crowd. Those are reasons, along with winning the turnover battle, all reasons why that's too much for BYU to overcome in Rocky Top to defeat the Volunteers in a game that the Volunteers win by 7 points or less. Third game, Chattanooga. Expect Chattanooga to show up. They're able to play effective in the first half. They're able to limit the Volunteers from making big plays in the first half, which is why they're able to keep it a close game. Except in the second half, after the Volunteers have made adjustments, they were able to make a high amount of big plays for their offense with both passing and running. And that's too much for Chattanooga to overcome because they're not able to continue to keep up with the Volunteers' offensive onslaught, scoring more than 14 points in the second, with the Volunteers scoring more than 14 points in the second half and having a high amount of big plays with both running and passing. Too much for Chattanooga to overcome. Tennessee wins that game against Chattanooga because the Volunteers' offense is an onslaught in the second half after having made adjustments after having made adjustments after halftime. Florida loss. They're playing a great Gators team, a team that has been playing great. They started playing great late in the season, and they did expect this to be a challenging game as usual against Florida. And Gators even though the Volunteers expect them to actually play effective in both the first half and the second half, and to make this a watchable, close, good game. That's just too much for the Gators are still able to make more big plays than the Volunteers for both the first half and the second half. That's the difference as far as why the Gators are able to win this competitive, close game. Along with including Franks, he's not contained as far as running for more than 9. He's not contained for running for a high amount of yards, more than 50, and similar to the Tebow days, and that's a huge backbreaker for the Volunteers. Along with Franks is able to make the big plays for the Gators in both the first half and the second half, and that's just too much for the Volunteers to overcome to win this competitive close game at Florida. Now, obviously, the Volunteers could prove me wrong, but I'm still picking the Gators because they've been playing great since last season, and they continue to play. They were still able to play effective enough to defeat the Hurricanes, and this is a high wall for the Volunteers to climb to defeat a most likely it's going to still be a top 10 Gators team. You can prove me wrong, but I'm still picking the Gators. Or have the Gator still pick? Yeah, I'm still picking the Gators. Georgia, this is a game that they're not expected to win, but Volunteers win because they're able to play effective in the first half, so the Bulldogs don't have that big lead going in the first half, including when the game is at halftime. They're able to play effective in the first half, including they're running the football. They win time of possession mainly because they're running for more yards than Georgia, which is a main reason why they're winning time of possession against the great UG Bulldogs. And they're also able to make the big plays in both the first half and in the second half more than UG Bulldogs, which is why they win a competitive, great, close game, similar to that 2006 by 7 points or less. Be extremely similar to that 2016 amazing game that the Tennessee Volunteers won with the miraculous final play, except unlike that game, this game is going to be in Tennessee, and Tennessee isn't expected to win this game, most likely, and along with they're not going to need a miraculous final play or a miraculous extremely late in the game play to win this game against the UG Bulldogs, because they make the big plays in both the first half and the second half more than the Bulldogs, which is the difference as far as why they win this game by 7 points or less, why they win this great close game, which I expect to be by 7 points or less than 7, either 7 points or under 7 points. And so that will be a great statement win for the Volunteers. And next is Mississippi State. Expect them they're able to remain in the game in the first half because they're able to contain the big plays from the Volunteers offense. They're able to contain the Volunteers from making too many big plays in the first half, and they're continuing able to contain the Volunteers, but the Volunteers are able to make enough big plays in the second half, which is just too much for Mississippi State to overcome in a close game that the Volunteers win, because even though Mississippi State is able to contain the Volunteers offense for making a high amount of big plays in both the first half and the second half, Volunteers still make more big plays needed in a close game. That's the difference, along with they win the turnover battle for why they win this decent close game, defeating Mississippi Bulldogs in a decent close game. At Alabama, this is a loss. Volunteers are out of their league, playing a excellent college football team. No doubt one of the 4 college football teams that are going to be in the 4 teams playoffs. And because Volunteers are on the road and they're out of the league, expected to show it on the field for both the first half and the second half. The best I can hope for in this game, and expect as usual also the Crimson Tide, as they usually done, the Saban era, to win by more than 21 points, which they've usually done, versus the Volunteers, and to score more than 31 points. And also, the best I can hope for in this game is the Volunteers don't quit, and they're able to, even though it's also an extremely high, even though it's also extremely high wall to climb, because they're playing Alabama, and it is in Alabama, is for the Volunteers to keep this a close, watchable game, both in the first half and the second half, and that includes for most of the fourth quarter, meaning 9 minutes or more, 9 minutes or higher than 9 minutes, 9 minutes or higher than 9 minutes, which that's the best I can hope for. Even if the Volunteers are playing terrific football or great football and they're undefeated, I'm still picking Alabama because they're an excellent team. They're great on offense. They're great on defense. They're great on special teams. They have an excellent head coach, Nick Saban, that is the Bill Belichick of college football. all reasons why I'm still picking the Crimson Tide to win this game, because the Volunteers are out of their league. Playing an excellent team, a juggernaut. The same juggernaut that the Volunteers would need to play close to a perfect game to even defeat the Crimson Tide, which I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's a really, 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 really low percentage for that to happen. Or come up with some great game plan or an excellent game plan to beat the Crimson Tide, and just don't see that happening, even if the Volunteers are playing terrific football or great football and they're undefeated. I'm still picking the Crimson Tide. South Carolina, South Carolina is they're able to remain in this game for both the first half and the second half, but Volunteers are able to win the turnover battle, and they're able to make the more big plays than the Gamecocks, including in the second half, including for both the first half and the second half, which is both reasons why I expect the Volunteers to win this decent close game, for why the Volunteers win this decent close game. Because they're able to make more big plays than the Gamecocks in the first half, and in the second half, and the Gamecocks and the Volunteers also win the turnover battle. And that thundering crowd messes up the Gamecocks' offense and messes with their defense. All reasons why the Gamecocks are not able to defeat the Volunteers in Rocky Top. Versus UAB, expect UAB they're able to they're able to limit the big plays for the Volunteers, and they're able to keep up with the Volunteers in the first half. But then in the second half, after Volunteers have made adjustments, they're able to play great in the second half with an offensive onslaught. They have a high amount of great or big plays for their offense for both running and passing. And it's an offensive onslaught with the Volunteers scoring more than 17 points in the second half, and UAB not able to contain the offensive onslaught. That's just too much for UAB to overcome. So it's not a laugher, it's not a joke and embarrassment in the first half, but it has made a laugher, a joker, and an embarrassment in the second half for the reasons I mentioned. And the Tennessee Volunteers win by more than 21 points versus University of Alabama Birmingham. Kentucky win. This is going to be a decent close game, like it's usually Tennessee playing Kentucky. Those can be decent close games, and I expect this to be a challenging game because it is at Kentucky. But still pick Volunteers win this game because they're able to. It's which team makes less mistakes. The Volunteers make less mistakes than the Wildcats in the first half and the second half. They also win the turnover battle, and they're also able to make more. They're also able to make more great plays than the Wildcats, which is why the Volunteers which includes both running and passing, which is just along with winning the turnover battle and Volunteers making less mistakes, which obviously means they have less penalties for both their offense and defense, while Wildcats have more penalties than offense, defense. That's all reasons why those are just too much. That's just too much for the Wildcats to overcome at home, and they lose to the UT Volunteers. At Missouri, expect this game to be a shootout, except the Volunteers aren't able to win it because they're not able to win it because the Missouri Tigers, they make more big plays in the first half, both with running and throwing, and they make more big plays in the second half, both with running and throwing, and those are reasons why the Volunteers are unable to win the shootout in Columbia, Missouri. Lose to the Missouri Tigers. Final game against in-state rival Vanderbilt. They win this game because Volunteers are able to make more big plays on offense, both with running. They're able to win the turnover battle. They're able to run for more yards than Vanderbilt and win that time of possession. And they have more great plays or more big plays on with their offense for slightly more than Vanderbilt for both with running and passing, and they win time of possession they run for more yards than Vanderbilt. They're winning time of possession. They win the turnover battle. They make slightly more big plays or great plays than Vanderbilt. The Vanderbilt's offense for both running and passing, and that's the difference in this game for why Tennessee wins expect to be as usually it is, a decent close game by 7 points or less. And those are my 2019 Volunteers football. Those are my predictions for the 2019 Volunteers football schedule. Picking the Volunteers to finish third. They're going to have obviously they're going to have a better season than the growing pain season of last season, but they're I still think that they're a year away from actually winning the SEC East. Doesn't mean they're not going to they'll be able to remain in the race for the SEC East, but they're not going to be able to do enough to actually win the SEC East for the obvious reasons of losing to Missouri, losing to Florida, a highly important game, and losing to Alabama. Obviously, I'm picking the Florida Gators. They lose 2 games, including one of them could be the Georgia Bulldogs, and they win all of the regular season games except for 2 games. And Georgia Bulldogs they win all of their games except for 1 game, and that 1 game that they don't win is against Tennessee Volunteers, but that's that's not an issue at all because they still win all their other games, and because they have more wins than the Florida Gators and less losses than the Florida Gators and less losses than the third place Tennessee Volunteers. That's why they win the SEC East, because they only have 1 loss. They win all their other games, and Florida Gators, they have 2 losses, and Tennessee Volunteers, they have 3 losses. Bulldogs, even though they have 1 loss, they still have more wins than the Florida Gators. They still have more wins than the Tennessee Volunteers. That's my predictions for who I have winning the SEC East, and why I have the UG Bulldogs winning the SEC East, which I expect, as you can see from the records, my predicted records, expect this to be an interesting, exciting SEC race to win the SEC East. Go Bright Orange Volunteers. It's going to be an exciting season for the Rocky Top Bright Orange Volunteers football team for the 2019 season.